My job at Mandiant is, my title is a Principal Cyber Threat Intelligence Analyst. I work for the Cyber Threat Coordination Center. I wear a lot of different hats, but part of my job is really to go through all of Google and find all of the cool stories that we have from all of the different investigations and tracking and monitoring and analysis that we do, and come and tell those stories to people like you. The reason that I'm here today is because Google Cloud is really doing a lot of pretty extraordinary things in security. We have a lot of really cool stories to actually tell, and particularly we have cool stories about how bad guys are actually attacking the cloud. I want to start with putting things kind of in perspective. This is a report that we did last year. Our office of the CISO got together and wanted to try and understand what kind of challenges, opportunities, what kind of different things people are facing when they move into some sort of cloud or hybrid infrastructure. I think this one statistic is probably more telling than any other and really kind of captures the main point that I want to highlight today, which is that as we kind of set the stage for this conversation about securing the cloud, it's really important to remember that almost every organization on Earth is doing something in the cloud. There's a lot of implications about that kind of seismic shift, but I think the most important one is that cloud security isn't optional anymore. Everybody who is concerned about security needs to be concerned about cloud security. This isn't something that we can really aspire to. This is not something that we can kick to like our Q4 2026. Cloud security is cybersecurity, period. And making sure your organization is safe means you have to protect everything, cloud included. There's actually one group, I think, on Earth that has fundamentally grasped this truth better than almost anyone else, and that's actually attackers. So we have some really interesting ways of going about talking about attackers, but just to keep things really short and sweet. Most of you probably know that when we, as Mandiant and as Google, kind of look at cybersecurity, we look at it from this attack-centric perspective. Every SOC alert, every weird packet, every phishing email, this is the result of someone, somewhere, trying to do a bad thing with a computer. So when we categorize threats, when we talk about it, when we organize it internally, we group these threats according to attacker motivation. So every kind of threat that we're going to talk about today is either a FIN group, an APT group, or an UNC. APT, everybody's probably familiar with. It means some sort of state-sponsored espionage group. FIN group is some sort of group that is very, very good at doing crime, to the point where we kind of hold them on the same level as most APT groups. And an UNC group for today's discussion is really pretty much everything else. Could be a weird cluster of indicators, could be a group that we've been tracking for 10 years, but we're just going to say for today, UNC is anything that isn't a FIN group or an APT. The one thing I want to keep in mind, and if you take anything away from this presentation, I really want it to be this slide. We're going to keep kind of repeating these themes over and over and over today, and really, really focus on understanding hybrid infrastructure and architecture, securing identities, and reducing attack surface. These are the three main pillars that we have seen again and again and again keep people safe from attackers who are trying to get into cloud environments. We talk about something like understanding hybrid architecture. The best way to think about it is you can't fix a leak if you don't know where your pipes are. Best way to simplify that. Securing identities, we know, and attackers know, that identity is how people move through cloud environments and how we let them move back and forth between cloud and on-prem. And we also know that reducing attack surface is a huge, huge way of going about making your organization more safe. You can do that through a lot of different ways, but really this comes down to kind of the basics: effective logging, effective detection, effective response. We're going to come back to that, but I do want to kind of crack straight into this. What we're going to talk about today is basically the four main challenges that we see organizations struggle with when it comes to cloud security. And I'm going to give you some examples of how bad guys have taken advantage of these organizations because of these struggles. I want to start by talking about hybrid integrations. One of the fundamental problems that we've seen in hybrid organizations is that they've adapted this hybrid model for their infrastructure, but they haven't adopted a hybrid model for security. A lot of organizations out there have migrated some of their critical workloads into the cloud without really adapting their security mindset to this new landscape. The idea is that when we talk about protecting against cloud compromise, we can't really treat this in a silo. But we also can't just copy and paste our security methodology from what we've been doing on premises to what we're now doing in the cloud. Every security approach in the cloud should really take into account that lines between on-premises and cloud environments are blurred, they're overlapping, they're dotted, sometimes they're not even lines at all. This changing approach to protecting identities with identities being this kind of security boundary for cloud environments makes it very difficult to actually approach this kind of stuff unless you actually fundamentally change how you think about security. In this context, what we're seeing a lot of challenges arise from is this kind of misconfiguration between tier 0 and this kind of weird lateral movement and privilege escalation that has become very, very common for attackers that we see in many, many, many different intrusions. I want to get into an example of what this looks like. But the idea is that when we talk about protecting, we can't, again, treat this in a silo. But this doesn't mean that we can really do exactly the same kind of security that we did in 1993. This is 2024. We have to adapt for what we're dealing with now. We can't just copy and paste stuff. And 63% of respondents that we did and talked to during this survey are using mostly the same or exactly the same approach to securing their cloud or hybrid organizations as they were when they were securing an on-premises. It just doesn't work anymore. I could spend the entire 45 minutes kind of preaching about 0 days and why this is an important stat, but this chart right here is probably one of the most fundamental findings that we've had about security in the past 12 months. If you look at this 97 0 days that have cropped up in 2023, this is a huge, huge problem. I'm not going to keep preaching about this. I'll keep this sermon pretty short. But first and foremost, let's kind of get this out of the way. 97 0 days does not mean 97 0 days affecting cloud. It means that we saw 97 different 0 days, which by definition are vulnerabilities that are exploited in the wild before a patch is available. But if these are not cloud-specific vulnerabilities, why am I talking about them at a cloud conference? This. Some of these vulnerabilities don't affect anything near the cloud, but they still enable attacks on cloud. This is a really, really good example of what happens when some of these vulnerabilities actually crop up. There was an actor using a proxy shell vuln that came out in 2021. That actor gained access to an Exchange server and stole emails. We then saw a different actor buy those emails that were stolen by this first actor who used a vulnerability. Those emails were used in a spear phishing campaign. They got a foothold on premises. Then they moved laterally to a domain controller, and from there they then deployed ransomware. And because that org had nothing between their domain controller and their cloud environment, their cloud ecosystem got really heavily hit by ransomware. This is a very, very common scenario. What we're seeing in intrusions, especially increasingly, is that many times there's more than one group involved when it's some sort of ransomware or extortion campaign. This is something that has happened because of a really long-standing evolution in the cybercrime ecosystem. This specialization that we're seeing in cybercriminals means that some people are just really good at breaking in and stealing emails. Some people are really good at using vulnerabilities. Some people are really good at just deploying ransomware. Some people are really good at just moving laterally. This is a very, very common example. We see this all the time. And again, this is an instance where a cloud infrastructure got hit with ransomware because of a vulnerability from several years ago on something that was nowhere near cloud. The key takeaways here that I want to talk about are really highlighting exactly what we've seen, especially with, again, securing tier 0 and properly segmenting kind of cloud versus on-prem. But when we go back to this kind of slide talking about 0 days, I want to kind of reiterate what that means for folks who are concerned about security. 97 0 days, which isn't the most we've ever seen, but 97 0 days is almost 2 a week. There's no organization on the planet that can keep a patching schedule at that pace. It's not possible. But there's also, luckily, no organization on the planet that's running all of those different technologies that are being affected by those 0 days. So really, you just have to worry about the ones that affect your environment. But again, as we just demonstrated, securing the cloud means sometimes protecting stuff that's nowhere near the cloud. Breaking down these takeaways into these kind of areas and looking at properly segmenting cloud and on-premises, just doing that would have prevented that compromise, or at least prevented the cloud from being compromised by that ransom attack. Properly securing tier 0 infrastructure also would have been really, really useful in preventing that attack. But the problem is, there's a cascade of failures in this kind of broad security environment that allowed these attackers to kind of move as fast as they could and as effectively as they could. And that's what resulted in this compromise. But I want to move on because we're really just getting started. The next thing I want to talk about is identity. Everybody here knows that identity is kind of the core of how people handle cloud and hybrid infrastructures. When you have a workforce that has to move between stuff hosted on premises, stuff hosted in the cloud, sometimes several different cloud platforms, the only real way to handle that is to assign everyone some sort of identity that's consistent, that works across all of those platforms and systems, that allows them to kind of move seamlessly without, frankly, your workforce getting really annoyed at having to log into different identities across different platforms. Unfortunately, as we've established, bad guys know this, and they've also figured out that managing identities is really, really, really hard to do well. There's a lot of problems when it comes to securing identity, especially in really complicated hybrid environments. Looking at, again, this kind of on-prem Active Directory is a very, very powerful tool, but it's something that is really kind of legacy when it comes to handling stuff like cloud. We also have a lot of problems that come with securing identity simply as a login. So you have these issues with things like multi-factor authentication, SMS, which is being increasingly intercepted. SIM hijacking is rampant right now. We see this happening all the time with a lot of, even some really unsophisticated actors, very, very good at SIM hijacking. Email compromises, push notifications. All of these things are intended to help, but they are also things that attackers have really figured out how to exploit. One of the things that's really changed when we look at specifically cybercrime in the past couple of years is their focus on credentials. To do a really, really brief kind of deep dive into the history of cybercrime. When we originally started looking at cybercrime, or when I started looking at cybercrime in the early 2010s, we had this big focus on things like banking Trojans. That kind of went away as more banks and the financial services started to work more on security. They started implementing things like chip and pin. The attackers then moved to kind of large-scale intrusions where they would steal millions of credit cards at a time and monetize them. That then kind of faded again as security got better. Then we started to see this kind of rise of ransomware as a service. Ransomware has kind of dipped in the past couple of years, but extortion hasn't gone away. What we're seeing now is a lot of the attackers who have done ransomware and used to deploy ransomware and steal a bunch of data and then say, hey, not only did we lock all your stuff down, we also stole a bunch. So even if you have a backup where you can come back from some sort of large-scale ransomware, we're still going to be able to leak or sell or profit because we can force you to actually pay this ransom because we've stolen a lot. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but what's really, really come up is that attackers have realized how powerful credential theft actually is. And we're seeing a huge focus on credential theft in the underground by malicious actors using this to actually get access and affect things in cloud. I want to talk about this particular intrusion. Pardon me. Some really fascinating stuff that happened here is we had an APT come in and target a particular individual. They had stolen creds. They used those credentials to get into an organization's VPN. They then installed remote access Trojans and some remote access tools, and then they remained on network thanks to maintaining persistence, thanks to those tools, establishing some backdoors. They moved into this kind of on-prem Active Directory, and they dumped a bunch of Active Directory databases to find weak passwords, weak hashes. They then cracked some of these accounts. They logged into the Active Directory as a global administrator, and that allowed them, once they had moved on and found this kind of global admin identity, they then used that to gain access to some of the most sensitive files that were hosted in this kind of SharePoint environment. This kind of attack, where we have this heavy, heavy focus on very, very sensitive data, is extremely common. And one of the things that we're seeing organizations do is stop hosting some of their more sensitive data on-prem, or because they think cloud is more secure. We also see things go the other way, but what that means is that even if you store something on-prem, anyone who's not immediately on-prem needs to use some sort of remote access to get in, which means identity is still coming into play when accessing this highly, highly sensitive data. This kind of theft, this kind of targeting that we're seeing isn't just limited to APTs. The other thing that we've seen on the rise is this kind of massive surge in what we call data leak sites. So yes, espionage actors, of course, are always going to want the juicy kind of secrets and crown jewels. Criminals, actually, I think, are probably even more ravenous when it comes to stealing data, and they're getting more so. This rise that we're seeing in data leak sites is indicative of how prevalent this kind of tactic is becoming and how much money these attackers are making by focusing on getting into these kind of secrets, moving around, grabbing what they need, and then holding their victims for ransom. A lot of the apex criminals that we track, these fin groups that we have tracked and named as kind of established criminal organizations, are also not afraid to kind of dip their toe into things like 0 days. Fin 11 in particular is really starting to use 0 days, particularly buying access to these 0 days that affect things like secure file transfer. The reason really is pretty obvious. Anything that you use a secure file transfer protocol or program or tool or whatever you do with it, anything that you're using to move that kind of data is going to be, by definition, pretty important. These attackers have realized that anyone who uses these kinds of tools to do this specific kind of movement is, by definition, moving very valuable stuff. So this is what they started targeting. A lot of the time, we're seeing them move specifically around and gain access to cloud environments so they can steal some of this stuff without having to mess around with some of the on-prem security measures that might be in place. All of these examples, I think, are really, really powerful. But it's not just kind of the apex predators that are doing this kind of targeting. One of these things that we've seen in the past is this kind of rise in these attackers who are using very, very simplistic tools. Some of the most unsophisticated attackers we've seen have been really, really, really annoyingly effective at targeting cloud using really kind of good old-fashioned techniques. This particular example was really kind of interesting to watch. This attacker sent more than 50 push notifications to their victim because they had their victim's login, and the only multi-factor authentication in place was a push notification on their phone. So they just got access, they found the right access that they wanted, found the individual who had access to the stuff that they wanted to get into, realized that it was push notifications only, and just annoyed that person until they actually hit, oh my God, yes, I want to get into my stuff. This user doesn't really know what's happening most of the time. At best, some of these push notifications and MFAs can be tricky sometimes. Sometimes you do get kind of weird bugs and stuff. So this isn't unusual activity if you're just a normal user. Once this UNC group actually got in, they had this particular individual hit yes and accept this kind of login. This UNC group then moved into Azure. They performed some recon. They identified some lists and emails. They then did this kind of SMS phishing campaign, targeting some of the admins of some of the organizations and the particular parts of the organization that they wanted to target. They registered, in this case, a virtual machine and added their own machine to the corporate network, which allowed them to kind of maintain a backdoor, essentially, or get a foothold, if you want to call it that. which allowed them to do a lot of different really nefarious stuff. They were able to download a lot of local admin accounts of things like VMware. They were able to deploy ransomware kind of across the board. They had this kind of very, very loud, messy, aggressive campaign, all of which resulted in really this kind of misconfiguration or misconfiguration of really MFA that allowed them to get access in the first place. These particular actors are not what I would call very sophisticated, really. I mean, they're not APT groups, they're not Fin groups, they're just, you know, basically people who know what works to get access and move around on network. This was, in this case, UNC3944, also known as Scattered Spider, also known as the bane of some of our investigators' existence. 3944 is very talented, very, very good at what they do. They move quickly, they move fast, they're very aggressive. They don't use very sophisticated stuff, but they don't have to. And that's really kind of the point. When we're defending against cloud environments, we have to defend not just against the tip top of everybody, of the peak apex predators, we have to defend against everyone. This is a really good example of how dangerous some of these attackers can be at targeting cloud and getting access using techniques that really aren't that sophisticated. These kinds of takeaways, I think, really kind of highlight where we are seeing a lot of risk in securing cloud. Getting this kind of multi-factor authentication implemented, but getting it implemented in the right way. Getting it implemented so that it can't fall victim to some of these intrusions, some of these very easy tasks. This is the kind of intrusion that we are really worried about because it can be and has been done by these attackers who are, again, very aggressive, very fast, moving as quickly as they possibly can to get as many infections as they possibly can. They don't really care about secrecy, they don't care about getting caught, they just care about making as much money and as much splash as they possibly can. This is the kind of stuff that really, I think, keeps us up at night. When you see this kind of huge impact from an actor like 3944, that's when we start to see some serious, serious concerns. The next thing I want to talk about is attack surface. Everybody's heard this term, everybody has heard different definitions of this term, everybody's heard different pitches about how AI can help you secure this term. The only definition of an attack surface that matters, as far as I'm concerned, is the surface that attackers see to compromise to get into your network. That's it. One challenge that they face, these organizations face, and that we have seen them kind of really stumble sometimes, is that they don't understand what attack surface means from an attacker perspective. Attack surface isn't just your network, it's everything that is a possible avenue for infection. I mean, we're talking about credentials, we're talking about keys, anything that's publicly exposed, all of these different resources. Huge, huge, huge issue, and very, very complicated to manage. This is a really good example as well of attack surface meaning something that you wouldn't normally think of. There was an organization that had this kind of account with owner permissions. It was created to kind of function as this kind of service account to authenticate to GCP platform stuff. They began uploading some code to a public repo, and by mistake, they actually uploaded the service account and its key to a public repository. Our internal team at GCP actually notified them and detected it within about 2 minutes and said, hey, this is a key, this is an account, it's being publicly uploaded. That notification went through, but due to a misconfiguration, it actually didn't get popping up on the actual customer system. So the attacker was actually able to find this by scraping GitHub. They used this login to actually get access to their cloud environment, and then they created 2,000 different requests to create VMs, and then they used those VMs to mine cryptocurrency. The notification in this case, if you want to call it that, was actually the cloud bill that unexpectedly was very high because they'd spent a lot of their credits mining crypto without knowing. This is a very, very kind of humorous look at this, but it's a very serious problem. One of the things that we have seen in the past is this kind of attack where instead of doing something annoying but not that harmful like mining crypto, we have seen things like this where attackers are a little bit smarter. They've used access to organizations like this to spin up as many VPNs or VMs, sorry, as many VNs as they can, build up all of these different infrastructures, and then use that actually to host and add to their own command and control infrastructure. This is a little bit smarter. You're not going to see the same kind of massive bill and usage if it's just a little bit of traffic that's pretty heavily encrypted because it's being used and added to an environment that is part of your attack surface but isn't something that you actually track. This is what we mean when we say attack surface is anything that attackers target. Understanding what your attack surface looks like, understanding how this actually works, necessitates viewing security like an attacker views security. I think when we talk about this kind of approach to attack surface, we really have to start asking questions like, do you prevent the creation of internet accessible cloud infrastructure? Do you have documented policy in place to actually look at how implemented some of these blocks and security protocols actually are? All of these different best practices, keeping an inventory, understanding how your inventory is being used, who has access to your inventory. Have the people who have access either moved roles or changed roles? Have they left the company? Have they hired new people? If they've left the company, has their permissions been revoked? Do those accounts still exist that are still out there? You know, you may have revoked the access of those accounts, but those accounts might still exist, and that's still part of your attack surface. And in fact, the big part of attack surface that's really challenging is that sometimes attack surface isn't even stuff that you can control. Sometimes your attack surface actually is other people. A lot of the challenges we've seen in handling cloud risks really comes down to this idea of dealing with third-party accounts. The big problem and the takeaway here is that this is a hugely challenging issue to tackle. This is made a lot worse by things like supply chain compromise, which are rare but dangerous. And believe me, I was there when the first alarm bells at FireEye started ringing about SolarWinds. More recently, we had this kind of huge issue with XZ, where really, thanks to kind of serendipity, a lot of us can sleep a lot easier at night because this kind of protocol that was being used was present in almost every single Linux product out there. Could have been a hugely disastrous problem. This is exactly the kind of problem that we're concerned about. But really, the reason that this is such a big problem is because none of us, Google included, has built our cloud infrastructure alone. We all, in order to create these kind of massive, complicated, huge, sprawling networks and infrastructure to support all of the amazing work that everybody does, it requires us to work with other people. What that means is that we have to take into account that our attack surface is those other people and their security practices and everything else that they do. This is part of understanding how attackers function. Third-party compromise isn't just limited to supply chain compromise. It's probably the flashiest and most dangerous example, but we see third-party compromises all the time for very, very mundane stuff that impacts cloud environments, simply because that's how organizations have to build stuff. There's nobody out there with the resources to build a massive cloud infrastructure using just what they have in-house. It just doesn't exist. Getting to this kind of activity, getting to this kind of infrastructure, building at the level that we are, requires working together. So we're going to end here in a little bit and then have some Q&A, but I just want to kind of draw everyone back to these three pillars. Understand your hybrid infrastructure, secure identities, reduce attack surface. Again, this is the one that I want you to take home. This is the key that we need to start thinking about from an attack surface, from an attack perspective, getting an idea of how this kind of stuff can impact you and understanding how attackers are coming after your organization is the key to building a secure cloud environment, because building a secure cloud environment means securing everything else that isn't in the cloud too. The other thing is, don't be afraid to call for help. There's a lot of people out there who are probably solving the same problems that you are. There's a lot of people at Google who are working on the same problems that you are. If you're a cloud customer, you have access and you can just say, hey, what does Mandiant think about this? What does Tag think about this? What does Project Zero think about this? All of these tools, all of these teams, all of these people are working on the same problems. And there's a lot of availability for us to actually work together and come to an agreement and understanding and share our insights. And I think that's really probably the most valuable thing that we can do as a community.